Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the MMA Outsiders. I'm Tom Albano. That's Zain Bando. And Zain, a lot of madness when it came to this past weekend. And we're going to be doing a lot of recapping. Most of it actually coming on the boxing front. But of course, the UFC Bellator both had cards this past weekend. This weekend, the UFC is going to have another UFC Vegas card. So we'll dive all into that. It should be a fun episode, maybe with quite a bit of debate.
Yeah, it should be for sure. I'm very much looking forward to jumping right in. I can't believe we're already at 13 episodes, to say the least. But before we get into everything and everything and anything that is combat sports, please make sure to go like and subscribe. Please make sure to share the show everywhere across the Empty the Bench network, and of course, MMA Outsiders ETB. You have all of that stuff scrolling across the screen, social media wise, of course. And be sure to also ring the notification bell. That way you're notified of everything and anything Empty the Bench Podcast Network related, whether it would be covering stuff from the NFL to the NBA to MMA to boxing. Everything that the Empty the Bench Network has to offer is usually covered. So please be sure to check out all of the shows, including, of course, the mainstay, which is the Empty the Bench show that airs weekly, covering everything in the world of the sports. That's always a banter of time too. And who can also see yours truly, Tom, on that show is one of the main hosts. So it's usually a good time. And of course, you can follow us on social for me at Zambando99, for him at Albano. And of course, you can find my stuff at djpen.com, and you can find Tom's stuff at Fans I Did MMA. We're both cranking stuff out every single week, so please be sure to check out anything and everything that we have in the combat sports piece. Now we can finally start to get into what was this past week, and we've already hit the end of October, and it seems to have kind of ended the lull that was the last 2 weeks. And we can slowly get into the more exciting stuff as the year starts to round out. But I wanted to start out with, we did have a UFC card this past weekend, and it was a UFC card that kind of flew a little bit under the radar. Let's talk about the main event here. We had Arnold Allen taking on Calvin Kattar in a very important fight at 145 pounds. And Tom, I have to say, this fight shockingly went away that I did not expect whatsoever. What were your impressions of the fight?
I think the only thing that I can come away with, Zain, is disappointment. Disappointment in the fact that it seems like it's the fourth time in 2022, but it feels like the third time in the last 3 months. It certainly feels like the upteenth time in which we had a UFC main event, and one that was either big in terms of title implication or big in terms of hype, and in an unfortunate and disappointing kind of ending with Calvin Kattar, in this specific case, blowing out his knee. I tell you, Zain, I just don't know. I feel like, as I said in the pre-show promo for this show, the UFC and injuries this year is a curse.
Yeah, I was gonna piggyback off that and say, just injuries in general. I feel like in-fight injuries in the UFC, regardless of a main event, just seem to be happening a little bit more frequently. And in regards to the fight itself, leading up to the injury, I thought it was a very highly entertaining fight. Both of these guys came in with a lot to prove. Allen's striking looked really, really sensational. It's the best I've ever seen him look. Despite the unfortunate ending, he looked great against Dan Hooker, but I think he put on a display of a performance against Kattar that you have to up your level. And I think that Arnold Allen did that, and he did that very well, considering that, Kattar's been in a couple tough fights as of late. He had the fight against Holloway where he was dominated, and then he had the questionable decision against Emmett. So from a Kattar perspective, I mean, this hasn't gone particularly well for him over the last year. I
No.
still think he's one of the best fighters in the world, and I think he's still proven that he can have blind cards. And I think Allen gave him a great fight, and I think before the injury, it was setting up to be one of those instant classic type of fights where you just felt that the momentum was going to turn, and it never ended up doing so. I wanted to also I'm going to give you my opinion first, but I want to get your take on Allen's post fight interview, because I thought what was interesting to me is I understand why Allen does not want to see a fight of his end like that, because he didn't feel like he truly won. But you're a top 5 guy in the world. You just beat someone who's fought former champions, who's beaten studs at 145 for several years in the past. I really, really wish that he would have shot his shot a little bit more, in the sense that there's kind of a logjam at 145, considering that, obviously it looks like Volkanovski is going to challenge Makachev in a unification fight. So it's like now it kind of leaves the door open for some other contenders. And it's like, I just wish he would have pushed his title shot claims a little bit more, because regardless of how you beat Calvin Kattar, in my opinion, I mean, beating somebody in the top 5 is still beating someone in the top 5, and they were really close in ranking. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah, it was 5-6.
yeah, it was number 5 versus number 6 in the world. Exactly my point. So, just kind of going off of that, I just wish he would have pushed, the title shot answer a little bit and more, because I really do feel like he's at that level to where he's either one fight away, or he's deserved at least a shot at interim status, considering what's going on with the division. And in terms of Kattar, I still think he can compete against the best in the world. I just think he's had some bad luck as of late, and this is just another one of those fights. And you could argue that he technically should be 1-1 for 2022, but unfortunately, he's going to end his 2022 run at 0-2. What were your thoughts, just kind of on everything that I've stated so far?
Yeah, first of all, I am completely with you when it comes to Calvin Kattar. It's just been unfortunate luck for that man, and I think he really can still hang with the best. I mean, he put on a hearty performance against Max Holloway. We're approaching 2 years now ago, and he looked great in there. He in terms of his chin and his heart. I mean, obviously that was a one-sided beatdown.
Yeah, and personally, I thought that Kattar won the Emmett fight.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I thought he
won.
Mm-hmm. I thought he won the Emmett fight. He looked great against Chikadze at the start of the year. And now we have this unfortunate injury when it comes to Arnold Allen, who obviously is going to take into the top 5 now with the featherweight. So the guys that he's losing to are not bad guys.
They're no slouches at all, and they're either guys who, are top contenders who have won titles or fought for titles. So it's not like he's fighting, number 13 losing to number 13. That's not that's not what's happening there. And like we've kind of both alluded to, he deserves to be in these main event fights. It's just the luck just simply has not been on his side as of late. And it's one of those things where there's that old saying, sometimes these things happen in MMA. Well, this is another one of those examples where, it can be a cutthroat business at times. And, I think Allen, kind of looking at his trajectory a little bit, although he won the fight in the way he did, which is a way that no one wants to see, he's right up there to where, if they decided like, oh, we're going to do, Arnold Allen versus Yair Rodriguez or Brian Ortega, for example, for an interim title, I would not be opposed to that. What do you think?
I think the next big fight for featherweight contenders, has to be Arnold Allen versus Yair Rodriguez. Now, we talked about the injury bug, Zan, and we talked about the main events suffering with injury. It was just a few months ago on Long Island in which Brian Ortega lost to Yair Rodriguez as a result of an injury.
Absolutely. In a fight that was looking like it was going to be an all-time instant classic.
So the featherweight division is especially cursed with this stuff.
For sure. And to make matters even worse, I mean it's good for the diehards like us because we want to see bigger fights, but you want to talk about cursed, you now want to talk about the current champion in that weight class wanting to fight somebody else from another weight class. If that isn't as cursed as you can get, I don't know what it is, given all the scenarios that are currently happening right now.
I mean, cursed, but I don't blame Volkanovski. As we mentioned last week, I don't think Yair Rodriguez or Arnold Allen have done, let alone anybody else, have done enough to really warrant a title shot. It seems like the super fight with Makhachev really is the best fight available on the table right now for Alex Volkanovski. Not obviously on a payday level and main event level, but also on a fan interest and entertainment level. I think we need to see Yair Rodriguez versus Arnold Allen before we can determine a true new top contender for the featherweight division. As far as his post,
so to kind of piggyback off of what you just said a second ago, does that potential Allen versus Rodriguez fight, in your opinion, does that warrant an interim title, or is it simply a 5-round main event on a fight night card somewhere?
I would do a simple 5-round main event. Again, the fact that both won their last fights with injury, as entertaining as they can be. Yair Rodriguez obviously not, his activity level has been over the past couple of years. Arnold Allen still a little green around the edges. I think basically what you need is just a normal 5-round main event. You put them on a fight night, and then you see how they go from there. If one of them gets a spectacular finish, or one of them comes out on top in a spectacular fight, like we know the featherweights can pull out, then you give them the title shot. If it's a kind of fight, I mean, the advantage of that is then maybe you throw Max Holloway, especially if Allen is the one who wins, because we've seen Holloway versus Yair Rodriguez before. We saw Rodriguez test Holloway, so maybe that warrants a rematch if Yair were to pull off the win in a Yair Rodriguez Arnold Allen main event. And then if Arnold Allen wins, you could obviously throw him in with Max Holloway, and that could be 5 rounds, or that could be a 5-round fight night, or that could be interim title fight. So
yeah, I hear what you're saying, but do you really think? Because personally, I don't. Do you really think a win over Calvin Kattar in the way that the fight ended warrants an Allen versus Holloway fight? Because personally,
no. That's why I said you do the Allen versus Yair Rodriguez fight first.
Mm-hmm. And in that case, in your opinion, who would Holloway fight, given those two, according to our scenario, would be fighting on one side, if you will?
That's tough. That's a little tough. But I think Allen has more upside.
No, I agree. I mean, would you be opposed to seeing Holloway versus Kattar too, considering that they're both coming off losses?
Not at all. I would be fine with that. You mean like in immediate aftermath, like if it were to come within the next 3 months or so?
Oh no, I mean like mid 2023.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, but you know what? Still, I would still rather see Yair versus Arnold Allen first before any type of fight with Holloway. Again, Holloway's in this weird position where it seems like he's better than everybody else, but he's not better than Volkanovski. So he's in a weird spot of what the hell do you do with him right now? It's bad to leave him inactive, but what can you do right now?
Well, true, and I mean, at this point, even if you were to give him an interim title shot, it's almost like he shouldn't even have to worry about that, considering like what his status is in that division. But we'll see where the UFC goes. But yeah, when you look at it more holistically, 145 is at a true log jam at the moment. Before we move on, is there anything else from the card that stood out to you? I also wanted to plug that I did start the night. I did start the night off on a bit of the wrong foot. I think it was 3-4, and I ended up racking off 4 out of the next 5 on the main card. So I think my final record on predictions was either 7-4 or 8-3. So overall, I did pretty well in terms of our picks. Was there anything that stood out to you either on the main card or the prelims? And because I just gave my record, how did you do in comparison to me?
Menza. I mean, I'm looking at the main card. Look at the main card, and I basically got 4 out of 5. The one I didn't get, I was gonna start with shout out Tresean Gore. I thought Josh Friend was gonna win that fight, but Tresean Gore, that the guillotine was just, I'm sorry, it left me speechless. The way that Tresean Gore was able to get his first UFC victory after all this time. Because we said last week, if he did not win this fight with Josh Friend, he was going to get caught.
Yeah, we did. And that's actually a fight that I predicted correctly. So I guess kudos to me. The one that I didn't get correct, and one that I think a lot of people were really fixated on, was the Dustin Jacoby
controversy.
Against Khalil Roundtree. Yeah.
I mean,
that's the only one. That's the only one I got wrong on the main card. I went 4 for 5, and that's the one that I lost. And when you look at significant strikes and you look at the way that fight played out, I don't see how I just got that one right, because it looked to me like they didn't.
I found it really funny, Zain, that the MMA media were praising the fact that there was this one judge that finally got approved by the Nevada State Athletic Commission to officiate fights in Nevada. And he was one of the ones who scored the fight in favor of Roundtree. But yeah, that's one I got right, but I don't feel good about it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure I'll go back and look myself later. But I'm pretty sure that's the only one I missed on the main card. So after starting the way that I did on the prelims, I was pretty impressed with how I finished, getting 4 out of 5.
I shout out Marcus Rogerio de Lima too. I mean, Andrei Arlovsky was doing pretty damn well for himself on the run that we were talking about, like the fact that he was still fighting to this day, and Marcos basically finished him in less than 2 minutes.
No, that's true. Did you have any opinions on the way that the Max Griffin Tim Means fight was scored, or did you agree with it?
I mean, I kind of was going for Griffin. I think Griffin has more upside anyway.
Yeah, and Tim Means is older, age more than likely did play a factor in that fight. And to be quite honest with you, I'm amazed that Griffin didn't finish him.
No, I mean, also looking at the bonus awards. So Tresean Gore, Roman Dolidze, Steve Garcia, Christian Wright. Oh yeah, Steve Garcia. Man, Chase Hooper just looked. He looked bad. I'm sorry.
He did not look good. Not only did he not look bad, he got finished pretty quickly.
That was brutal. What do you suppose, Zain, is next with Chase Hooper? Do you want him to move down to bantamweight? Do you want him to try and find a new camp?
What's his current UFC record at the moment?
That's a good question. Looking at his UFC record, let's see, 1-1, 2. He is 3-3. He has wins over Daniel Taymur, Peter Barrett, and Felipe Colares, but Now he's lost to Steve Garcia, lost to Steven Peterson, and he lost to Alex Caceres.
Yeah, and would you or would you not agree that would you or would you not agree that that Caceres fight was a fight that he could have easily won? Because I thought so at first glance watching that as it was happening.
Which fight?
The Bruce Leroy fight.
The Bruce Leroy fight?
Mm-hmm.
See,
And I remember being frustrated because he would do so many good things, whereas like he would set up a combination and it would look fine, but he would never finish the rest of it or try to go in for a finish or do anything like that. He kind of left Bruce Leroy stagnant. If you remember the fight, he kind of let Bruce Leroy come to him, and that was not a good strategy, and he ended up making the decision.
And then I think that's more about the fact that, Chase Hooper is, what is he, only 21 years old now?
Yeah,
23.
Didn't he enter the UFC when he was 19 or 20 years old?
Yeah, he was the youngest fighter. I remember being on the UFC roster, and that's the thing. He needs the experience. As much as I feared at the time, because I do like Bruce Leroy, I said, this is kind of that situation where they're going to use him as kind of a stepping stone for
which is what everybody thought.
But I think the thing is, Zan, is that I think the UFC sometimes it's another one of these situations where they're throwing him into a couple of beasts too quickly. They need to build him up. Like I have said, I think the best fighter to ever get the slow roll from the promotion, the slow build up, was AJ McKee in Bellator. How they took him on first thing as a professional fighter, and they slowly built him up over the course of 6-7 years en route to becoming the featherweight champion of the world.
Oh, for sure. Another fight I wanted to touch on was the John Young Park Joseph Holmes fight, and I was just curious. Joseph Holmes has fought in front of Dana White. It feels like for the last year and a half now, and do you think that? He's obviously still young in the sport. It's his third professional loss of his career. Do you think that do you think Holmes' next fight is a do or die for him? Because personally, I think so.
Yep, big time, do or die.
Mm-hmm.
If he even gets the next chance. Who's not to say this might be it?
I think he will. I just think there's something about guys that Dana sees in person where he tries to give them every chance that he can. He did the same thing with Sage Northcutt. He's done it with Mickey Gall before, or he's done it with Manny Vasquez. He's done it with a bunch of these guys where Dana feels that they have something that he sees in them, and I feel like Holmes is still one of those guys, but he needs to work on his takedown defense and he needs to work on stopping submissions because he got submitted pretty viciously too by a guy who's extremely seasoned on the ground, and that's kind of his MO a little bit, and Holmes got exposed for it. So there's that, and that's an outcome that I wasn't surprised to see either. Overall, though, in terms of a grade, now that we've talked about a good chunk of the fights on this card, I'd actually give this card a solid B. There were a lot of impressive performances. There were some guys that I think people forgot about that performed really well, and I think there were some guys to look out for. Cody Durden for sure, Garcia, Park, DeWeiss. Pretty much all of the fighters who won on this card were pretty darn impressive. And if you don't know Trayshawn Gord's story, I would highly recommend for any of you listening to look it up because his pre-fight media scrum was pretty telling, if you will. And he went out and performed like his career was on the line, and he performed extremely well and beat a guy who was super, super seasoned and very hyped through the LFA and stuff. And it was just a quality win for the Ultimate Fighter veteran, and he fought pretty well, in my opinion. So
For sure. Yeah, I agree. Solid B. All right. But the fight that got a lot of attention over the weekend, of course, was not from the MMA world. It was from the boxing world, if you even want to call it boxing. Jake Paul beats Anderson Silva, unanimous decision, 8 round unanimous decision. Zan, I did a moment of mayhem on this following the fight, and I reiterate the same thoughts that I said there onto here, and that is, I think Anderson Silva moved around very well. I think Anderson Silva, even at 47 years old, still has something in the tank. You know what that is? Like, he's not going to challenge for a WBC uh, championship at any time soon. He's not going to challenge for a WBA championship anytime soon. But he still can move around very well. And kind of as I feared, you know, say what you will about the kind of people he's fought. Say what you will about his MMA prime. This is boxing. Julio Cesar. Who did he fight? So Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and Tito Ortiz in the past.
Yep.
Again, Tito Ortiz from the MMA world, like him, not really a boxer.
Mm-hmm. Not really a boxer either.
Yeah, and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., I think, this might be a very harsh statement, but I don't think he belongs in the sport of boxing, and I don't think he has earned the right to say he is a boxer for the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, you made that very clear, I think, back in episode number 4, number 5. So it's good to see that you have the same sentiment, because it's not just your opinion, but looking at it through the numbers and as to he's fought, it could even be classified as the truth, because I think any hardcore boxing fan knows that he's been exposed severely over the last several years. So,
but anyways, what I was saying was that he moved around well, but it didn't seem like Paul was in trouble at any point in the fight. It didn't seem like Paul was having any sort of rough time, and honestly, I'm just thankful that he only got knocked down once in the last round, and he seemed okay afterwards. But it also just seemed like Zain, hopefully nobody takes this the wrong way, but I think he was just there for the payday. I'm not saying fight fix, but I'm saying we didn't see as competitive of a nature as I think we could have seen from Silva, or that basically he has his limits. Like I said, Jake Paul is younger. He obviously is not a legit boxer in the eyes of several in the boxing community. Me kind of in that same boat. But considering all that he has to fight for, and we'll get into what's next for him, considering that, he didn't seem like he was going to have any trouble. This was a big win for Jake Paul.
Oh, for sure. I wanted to also mention that, I do think that given the amount of hype that there was around the fight, did you or did you not think that there were several parts of the fight that just seemed like a dud to you?
Yes. I mean, we saw,
because I just felt like after round 5 is when the fight slowly but surely just got a little bit more boring. I thought the first 4 rounds were super electric. They were both going after each other. They were both trying to knock each other out. And then it just seemed like the rest of the fight was a little bit of a coast until near the end of round 8 or so.
And then, I mean, we've seen, because since this is an MMA show, we've seen Anderson Silva kind of play around with his opponents. I mean, you think back to when he fought Demian Maia in Abu Dhabi UFC 112. You think back to several of his middleweight title defenses. We've seen Anderson Silva kind of, play with the prey a little bit. And here he seemed to try and play some mind games with Paul. And it was entertaining. But to say it worked, kind of a different story.
Yeah, because I don't think it truly worked, and I do think that for anyone who paid the money for it, I mean, if it was me and I had actually paid to see it, I think I would have felt robbed if I was in a situation where I'm more of a casual fan and I only buy one or two a year, and it's only when Jake Paul's fighting. I think this was another one of those scenarios. And I'm trying to criticize anybody who did buy it. You do you. That's your
I
that's your prerogative. But I'm just
Zan,
saying,
I am kind of interested to see how many pay-per-view buys this got.
I'm just as curious as you too, and I would guess that our prediction about it being similar to the Woodley numbers is going to be incorrect.
I mean, for their sake, even if it doesn't reach the Woodley 1 numbers, it better not reach the fall to the Woodley 2 numbers.
Yeah, especially considering how the second Woodley fight ended for sure.
I mean, if Paul versus Silva is a better comparison to the Paul Woodley 2 numbers than the Paul Woodley 1 numbers, can you take Jake Paul seriously if you're Nate Diaz or Canelo Alvarez?
I don't think you can, but then again, I don't know if those guys care because they want the money. So I think they're going to do whatever the dollar says.
Fair enough. Let's before we get into Nate Diaz and Canelo, let's talk about so part of Paul and Silva's fight was a bet. I mean, if you think going back against the Paul Woodley fight, you had the bet with the tattoo. Here, Jake Paul and Silva had a bet where basically Paul said, "If I win, you're going to help me create the United Fighters Association." And Silva seems to be a man of his word, and they are going to do such a thing. You know, this is going to be the latest attempt to get fighter unionization in the MMA world. And Zan, I know what unions can do for the sport, and I'm not anti-union. I'm, all for it. But it just seems like with how many times a union has been tried to develop for the sport, for the sports fighters, it's like,
yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think he, and I'm not trying to be an asshole because seriously, that's not my intention. But I really do think that Jake Paul pulled it out of his ass just to see how many people would pay attention. Because you mean to tell me that when he was considering making a bet, that he didn't just randomly think of that on the fly? It's not like we were teased like, oh, he might talk about this or anything like that. Nobody had any idea. And to me, I just think he did it just to see how many people would pay attention. And then that's not, again, that could be, I could be totally wrong and he could actually be trying to pursue it. But just the way he did it in kind of a half joking manner a little bit and did it in his bravado kind of way, I don't see how it's actually A, legit, or B, coming together. Because I want to clue you in on a little something. I don't know if you caught this or not, but I wanted to let you know that in a Jake Paul media scrum shortly after the press conference, I believe you may have caught this. He was asked a question about his attendance at UFC events and his current thoughts on Dana White. And Jake Paul had hinted that Dana had attempted to quote unquote sabotage the event. And I'm just curious if this, for example, is a counterclaim to Dana White's supposed allegations that Paul is saying that he did. Number one, and number two, do you actually think, in your heart of hearts, that Dana White would try to sabotage an event like this? Because he also made a claim in that same interview that he and his crew had been banned from all of future UFC events until further notice.
I mean, to have my silly answers in, the fight, part of the big press around the fight, the big press man involved was Ariel Helwani. and Dana White will do anything to make Ariel Helwani's life a living hell. So I would not be surprised if Dana tried to put his foot in, not to mess with Jake Paul, but to mess more with Ariel Helwani. But I mean, I want to say no. This is the thing, Zan. I want to say no, that I don't really believe he tried to put any sort of stop to this. Mr. Big Boxing Fan, Dana White. Mr. I will watch boxing events during the middle of UFC cards, Dana White.
And of course, this is an older one that has since been wiped from the internet, but I promise it happened. Dana White at a dance recital for his daughter, pulling out an iPad that has a fight that has a fight on the other side of the world in Saudi Arabia between Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz Jr. On his iPad on DAZN. If you want a little bit more hypocrisy, there's another example of that for you as well.
So I mean, I would not be surprised then, but I highly doubt that Dana was trying to mess with the card and trying to get it canceled. Why should he care?
Oh, I mean, he shouldn't, but because Dana White is Dana White, he will do anything to go after his enemies, if you will. And for those of you who are newer fans, more than likely it's going to take a little bit of research for you guys to dissect what we're talking about, because we could spend an entire episode on Dana White's list of enemies. Jake Paul is one of maybe about 50 or so that have come up over the years. So, but what I will say is, Dana did extend a hand to Jake Paul about random drug testing at the beginning of January of 2022, and nothing ever came of it. So I'm curious if this war of words or war of behind the scenes, if you will, is payback for what could have been at the beginning of the year. And also, as a matter of fact, when Jake Paul says, "Oh, Dana White is doing everything he can to sabotage my event," I wouldn't blame him, because not trying to be disrespectful on the MMA side here, but his UFC Fight Night card was a mid-tier level card, and he was probably worried that the Showtime fights would outsell. And he probably did everything he could, similar to the Affliction saga, where he wanted to make the UFC number one again. And I feel like this was just another one of those incidents. And yeah,
and on that note, Zan, I mean, we've had UFC cards that go head to head with major boxing events. I mean, we saw it in 2017 when Luke Rockhold made his return in, I think it was Pittsburgh, on the same night that Canelo Triple G had their first encounter in the boxing ring. We've seen it. We've seen it multiple times. I remember there are nights where we have a big heavyweight or welterweight championship fight, and there's a UFC fight night that is, opposite it. Like. Again, is it just because that this is Jake Paul that all this is going on? Like, why does Dana White have to concern himself with Jake Paul?
I mean, he shouldn't, but Dana White is Dana White, and he's going
I know, Zan. But what's it called? Rhetorical question.
No, it is a very rhetorical question, and I think personally the best way to settle this whole thing is to have them duke it out in the ring with the 3-minute round little exhibition. But we know for certain that A, the Nevada State Athletic Commission will never approve that, and B, the last time that Dana tried to do any sort of thing remotely close to that, Tito Ortiz chickened out on him the day before the fight itself, and he said that, and they told Dana to never do one of these sorts of things again. And if he did, there's a chance that he could get his promoter's license taken away. Again, that was about 15 years ago, but
yeah,
it's kind of the same thing where it's another quote unquote business deal, even though it isn't really a business deal gone bad. It's just more of a vendetta. And to be quite honest with you, it's I think it's something that really Jake Paul started. And if it wasn't for Jake Paul starting it, I don't even know if Dana would really know who he actually was.
I mean, probably not. And also, when you're talking about would he try anything like this, there was actually, do you remember Sandu?
I do.
Suggested that Paul versus Dana.
I
Yeah,
do.
Dana White versus Jake Paul, the Triller thing. And Dana was like, what the fuck?
No, it's true. But what made that whole incident even funnier when he responded, "What the fuck," was that he was responding to a tweet from Santu that had been written over a year and a half before that video was even recorded. If you look at the timestamp
Yeah.
of the tweet compared to the GQ,
April 25th, 2021.
Yeah, it was hilarious. Yeah,
And it was in a very playful tone too. You saw the crying face emoji with the smile.
No, that's true. And for those of you guys who haven't seen the actually me GQ video, it's pretty entertaining to be quite honest with you. And actually, most of the questions that he answered have ended up as he said not happening. So far, he's perfect in that regard. I guess kind of moving forward. I think that this UFA thing is going to die out pretty quickly. And I think it was more so just a marketing ploy to see how many people would pay attention. As long as Dana White is still the UFC president, unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a fighters union because if there was, I think it would change the entire trajectory of the sport as we know it today. So moving on to what is a little bit more important, and that is Jake Paul and Nate Diaz's team getting into a backstage scuffle before the event. First off, when is Team Diaz not at another event not named the UFC? And number two, you just always know that no matter when Team Diaz shows up, there's going to be trouble. So when I first saw this, I'm like, okay, this isn't surprising at all. And then apparently, according to Jake Paul, after his win against Anderson Silva, he claimed that Nate Diaz was escorted out of the arena, which ended up being verified by multiple sources who were at the event. What did you think of this whole thing? Do you find any of this stuff entertaining? Because a part of me kind of does a little bit, and also I'm just kind of curious. Do you think that Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz will actually happen? And do you actually think that Nate Diaz has a legitimate chance against a quote unquote professional boxer who you and I both know is not really a professional boxer?
Zain, the first thing I would like to say is sometimes these things happen in MMA. Gentlemen, we're on national television.
Yeah.
Anytime Nate Diaz's team.
Words by the famed 2-year run MMA commentator Gus Johnson turned Big Noon Kickoff #1 Fox play-by-play announcer and sometimes NFL team B Fox announcer on Sundays too.
Yeah. Anytime Nate Diaz or Diaz's team is involved in something, I usually will think back to the Strikeforce Nashville brawl. Anyways, as far as this fight goes, this potential fight goes, again, I think it's going to come down to, first of all, how much does Nate Diaz want to do it? Because if we're going off of his UFC 279 post-fight interview, it does seem like Nate Diaz wants to do something. You know, he has said that he wants to go show his fellow MMA fighters, Conor McGregor included, how to get it done in the boxing ring. Would Jake Paul be that kind of fighter? I mean, I could see it. I could see Paul versus Diaz, and I could see the casual appeal of Paul versus Diaz. I could see the hardcore fan appeal of of Paul versus Diaz in the hopes that Nate can be the one who shuts Paul up. I think it's going to be very curious to see how Paul versus Silva does, and maybe I could see that having an effect on if Nate goes through with it or just says, nah, something else.
Yeah, I don't know. As we're going through this segment, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get sick of the Jake Paul saga, considering that Jake Paul hasn't fought anybody who's actually a true professional boxer.
Sam,
And
you're
and
just now getting sick of it?
hang on. I'm not done yet, because that was going to transition into my next point. Did you see Anthony Smith's small rant on his radio show, basically accusing Jake Paul of beating up on MMA legends for his own gain? And I'm just kind of curious, what did you think of that video? If you had a chance to see it, and if you have, is Anthony Smith right in his sentiment?
No shit, he's right. He's so right. I mean, that's why I don't consider Paul, too much of a legitimate boxer. I mean, look at his fight. His fights have been
Anson Gibb,
a YouTuber, Nate Robinson, which was a former NBA player, which was an absolute joke. I loved hearing. I would watch that fight again just for Snoop Dogg's commentary, not for Jake Paul's fighting.
Yeah, that was that.
Ben Askren, who is again a wrestler, not a boxer,
and arguably, as not been proven, was arguably a fixed fight. I didn't think it was.
Yes, that finish smelled very fishy.
It was
Tyron Woodley won, which was and then Tyron Woodley 2, which was a late notice fight, and Woodley just was not ready for and ended up getting knocked out. And then so maybe Paul is making in some money, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. So credit to him for making money. Good on you. But really, I'm sick of it.
If he really thinks that he has a chance against the pound for pound best boxer in the world, I don't know what he's on, but whatever he's on, I want some of it, because there is no way that he would last 8 minutes with Canelo Alvarez.
It must be some pretty good shit, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, fighting Canelo Alvarez is when you've paid your dues. 120 fights in a row with 14 finishes within the first 3 rounds. He's done absolutely none of that, and a little bit less than none. He's done nearly zero in my book, and his wins just, to me, aren't legitimate. It's a padded 6-0 record of guys who are older and who haven't really been in the boxing space way too long, and to me, they just all feel like cash grabs. But the reason why we're talking about it is because it's a hotly debated topic amongst people in our space, people in the combat sports sphere, the fans, the casuals, everybody. I mean, it just is. It is until he fights a legitimate boxer is when I'm going to be really curious to see how he actually performs. And I understand the Hasim Rahman Jr. fight did not work out, but he really does need to fight a legitimate boxer before we're talking about Canelo Alvarez. I mean, are you serious? It's like telling a rookie quarterback, like, hey, like you're gonna be facing a guy who was drafted in the 8th round and whose levels below you, and then a few weeks later we're gonna expect you to be Lamar or Jackson or something like that. So it doesn't make sense.
So, Sam, as much as I mean, I absolutely agree. I'm sick of this, and he hasn't fought a boxer. That the next time Jake Paul's in the ring, maybe it'll be against Nate Diaz. And the next time Jake Paul's in the ring, the WBC is still going to put a belt on the line. They're going to. So
Because
Because why?
boxing in its own way. That's
Yes.
why. Boxing gets in its own way.
So you had remember the money belt? So 3,360 diamonds, 600 sapphires, 300 emeralds, 1.5 kilos of solid 24 karat gold, all made with alligator leather and a partridge and a pear tree. So I think if the Paul Diaz fight goes down, or even Paul versus Canelo, we're gonna have another belt, and it's gonna have like 5,000 diamonds and 1,000 sapphires and rubies and 500 emeralds, and it's gonna have 2 kilos of 24 karat gold, and it's probably gonna be made with 3 alligators this time.
And when there's dollars on the line, it makes sense apparently. So I think whatever his next fight is going to be, he's going to go where the money is, and that'll be that. We've kind of we apologize for those who have gotten at this point in the podcast. I'm sure you guys are probably sick of us talking about Jake Paul over and over.
I'm sick of us talking about Jake Paul.
But as a matter of fact, we do have to move on because there were other news and notes and everything else going on in the MMA space. We also had another MMA event. Can you guys believe it? We had another MMA event.
Yeah, we have Bellator we gotta talk about. We have Mansouri Barnaoui. Who's that? Well, he was a Road FC lightweight $1 million champion. Was a lightweight champion in M1. Actually challenged for the KSW championship a few years ago, but he had never competed in Bellator, and he hadn't competed in the cage in 3 years. And so, what does he do in his first Bellator fight? Well, he main events a card in Italy and submits Adam Piccolotti, who has been a Bellator veteran for about 7 years, as a lightweight Grand Prix is about to start next year. I think, Zan, well, first of all, I'm kind of heartbroken and disappointed how exhausted Piccolotti seemed to get as the fight went on. It didn't seem like he had his energy with him. And then for Barnaoui's sake, I mean, the world is your oyster right now.
Yeah, I mean, he looked incredibly impressive. And for those who didn't know his name before this Piccolotti fight, they know him now. And we have to give him all the credit in the world because you and I both got this fight wrong. A week ago, not only were we wrong on this fight, we were very wrong. And this is easily the biggest win of his career to do it in Italy the way he did it. I think he's going to be a name to look out for sure, and I wouldn't be surprised if he holds a Bellator title midway through 2023 or at the end of 2023. This is one of those fights that he needed to win, and he certainly did, and he looked very impressive doing it. So, and on a Bellator card that wasn't particularly the best they've ever had. So,
yeah, the Bellator card, I have to admit, Zan, was actually pretty boring. It was actually pretty disappointing. The only major things you saw was Barnaoui's submission to Piccolotti and Fabian Edwards, the younger brother of the welterweight champion Leon Edwards in the UFC, scoring a win over Charlie Ward. And maybe Fabian Edwards looks like maybe he's going to want to challenge Johnny Edlin for the Bellator middleweight championship and get gold of his own like his brother.
Yeah, which I think would be a phenomenal fight considering how spectacular Edlin looked in him capturing the belt is 4 or 5 months ago. That would be a phenomenal fight that has the makings of maybe happening a couple of times too, if that's the route that Bellator decides to go.
Oh, so Zan, by the way, not only did we have all these fights last weekend that we had to talk about, we just got done. Zan, now we got to talk about fights this weekend. So not another UFC Apex card that's not exactly big, not exactly seen in favorable lights, but we do have a pretty pivotal strawweight main event between Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Lemos.
Yeah, this is an outstanding fight. This is one of those high level fights that Dana White always hypes up. He's like, these strawweights and flyweights are sometimes the best fights on the card, and this just is the makings of one of those. And really, I think this fight is a crossroads fight. You have two fighters who are both relatively young in their careers. Not as young as Sonic the Hedgehog, though I'll admit. But
the advertisements are great.
but I will say that this is one of those fights that could change the trajectory of the strawweight division for years to come. And I've been high on Amanda since her UFC debut and since her 1 minute finish just about a year and a half ago. This is a fight that I think has huge upside for either woman, and I do think that it'll either be a Rodriguez decision win or it'll be a Lemos a Rodriguez decision win or a Lemos stoppage victory. I'm looking at the resumes; they both speak for themselves. 4 out of 5 for both women. 4 wins in their last 5. Rodriguez is surprisingly a pretty decent favorite. I was thinking that the line would be a little bit closer, but I do see this either ending in a finish or a decision. I don't see anything crazy like a draw or a DQ here, but I do expect both women to fight well. I do expect Rodriguez to utilize her wrestling, and I do think the best way for Amanda to win this fight is to stop the takedown, look for the early knockout, and see what the hell happens. That's what I think.
I'm going to go very similar, Zan. I'm going to say this. If Amanda Lemos does not get the finish within the first 2 rounds, this one is going to be Rodriguez's, because if she doesn't get the finish within the first 2 rounds, it's basically saying that Rodriguez is utilizing her takedowns well and would continue to do so over time. I think this is actually a bigger fight for Rodriguez than it is for Lemos, because Rodriguez is number 3 in the rankings. Obviously, we have a strawweight title fight coming up, not this coming weekend, but next weekend, when Weili Zhang is going to challenge Carla Esparza. So, but if Carla Esparza pulls it off in that fight, and Marina Rodriguez ends up getting the win here, could be Rodriguez locking in herself for a title shot.
Yeah, and I think if that were to happen, I think a perfect placement for that fight would be the March pay-per-view in a co-main event slot. I think would make a whole lot of sense to beef up the UFC schedule a little bit more. What do you think of that proposition?
I could see springtime, March or April, I could see.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm with you there. If she doesn't get the finish within the first 2 rounds, this is definitely going the distance. This is going Rodriguez's way. But I do like Lemos here, and I've always ever since her UFC debut, I've been pretty high on her. But I do think age for both of these women is going to play a factor because they're both slightly on. I'd say Rodriguez is on the mid side of her 30s, whereas Lemos is a little bit older, if I'm reading that correctly. Are they the same age?
I think Marina Rodriguez is 35 years 6 months. Amanda Lemos is 35 years 5 months. They're only a few weeks apart.
I had for some reason that Amanda was slightly older, but my point still stands. I do think that age could play a big factor in this fight because you never know the loser of the. My overall point was that the loser of this fight may never get a chance at potentially getting a title shot ever again in their career. So that'll be something to keep in mind too. I would argue, Tom, though, kind of moving along, that the co-main event is actually the people's main event. What do you think?
I like this main event. You got Neil Magny, who's been a constant presence in the welterweight division, taking on Daniel Rodriguez, D-Rod, who's been a bit of an up-and-comer. He was involved, if I'm not mistaken, Zan, in the big shuffle back at 279.
He was. He sure was.
Yeah, obviously, he was one of those. He was one of the unfortunate victims of that big shuffle, and he scored a big, albeit controversial decision win over.
Very controversial. And would you argue that this is a quick turnaround?
Very. That's why I got shocked when I saw that he and Magny were going to be fighting on this card. I'm like, credit that he didn't take a lot of damage, and credit that it was a decision, but still surprising that he would take a fight on this quick turnaround, especially against a guy like Neil Magny.
Yeah, I agree. I do think with the quick turnaround, though, I don't think it's going to go very, very well for Rodriguez. I do see Magny winning a decision, but I do think this is a very entertaining fight. What do you think?
Yeah, odds are pretty even. I think this one's going to be Magny's.
I'm slightly a little biased considering that he is training in Illinois now. So I just wanted to plug that.
Mm-hmm.
So, by the way, Bolton is a pretty small town. It's actually a town that I've actually never even really heard of, but I just know that given that there's not a ton of UFC fighters from our state, it's nice to see one every once in a while, as well as Bilal Muhammad as well. So yeah, I just had to plug that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Magny by decision. I think if D-Rod gets a win here, especially if it's a finish, a quick finish, I think this fight is going to do wonders for him. But I think this is a less of a risky fight for D-Rod. I mean, if he falls short, I mean, we can say it's short notice, and he already scored a big win this year. So I think I'm not too pressured with D-Rod. I'm good.
That's true. And if he also loses this fight 4 out of 6, 4 out of 6. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. I apologize for interrupting. What were you going to say?
Nothing else. I was just going to say this is a pretty winnable fight for Magny, and it puts him in a pretty good situation when it comes to the welterweight rankings, him trying to work his way back up.
True. There's one other fight on the main card I wanted to touch on, and that is Chase Sherman versus Josh Parisian. I'm just curious as to your thoughts. I think this is another one of those do or die situations for Sherman because look at all
4
of
of his
that.
last 5. Yeah. This is do or die. This is do or die for the Vanilla Gorilla. And he's taking on Parisian. I know Parisian's a little older than him, but I still think Parisian has more upside, unfortunately, for him.
I think he finishes Sherman before the third round would be my prediction.
I second that one. I second that.
And that actually is because this card's so light, I'm gonna only go with one best bet this week, and my one best bet is to have Sherman versus Parisian go inside the distance, and I think it's a hammer for sure.
You know what, Zan? I think I'm gonna second you on this. I think that's same. I think the only bet I would place this weekend is Chase Sherman getting finished.
Are there any other fights in his card that catch your Miranda Maverick is back in action on the prelims. Do you think that this is also a must win for her against Shayna Young this weekend?
Yes, because I think Miranda Maverick has way more hype and excitement around her than Shayna Young. Shayna Young is 6 years older. Shayna Young, I know, is only 31, but I think she's about to be entering that category where she's just going to be used to put others like Miranda Maverick over.
For sure. And obviously we can never judge a card until a card is over, but I think this is setting up to be one of those cards where if you're a hardcore, you're going to watch this card. And if you're a Dana White Contender Series fan, you're going to watch this card. But if you only catch UFC events every once in a while, I don't think this is the card, unfortunately.
especially Zen, when we have the big UFC at the Madison Square Garden coming up next week.
Yeah, for sure. In that one, I'm super excited to preview just because every November the UFC always bring bangers to Madison Square Garden. You, sir, have attended a MSG press conference, which is something that I've done. That's something on my bucket list for sure.
Well, Zan, But then the following week, and this is where we talked about with the MMA schedule. The following week, Bellator's in Chicago.
Oh, I can't wait. I just got more info on all of it earlier this week, so I'm already gearing up. I can hardly wait. I've been to plenty of Bellators in Chicago as a fan, but this will be my first as a member of the MMA media, so I can hardly wait. And
Cool.
given the card that I am more than grateful to see, I'm pretty excited.
Good. One more fight we got to preview, Zan, before we get out of here. Dmitry Bivol is going to be defending the WBA light heavyweight title this coming weekend against Zurdo Ramirez. So Zurdo Ramirez, Zan, we've seen him in action at lower weight classes and be pretty successful. He was a former super middleweight champion, now competing fully at light heavyweight against Dmitry Bivol, who, I mean, Zan, he got the win this year when he defeated Canelo Alvarez.
He sure did, and I think a lot of people who didn't know who Bivol was before the Canelo fight know who he is now. And no disrespect to any of the other fights that are taking place this weekend, but I would argue that this is the biggest fight of the weekend. Would you not agree with that?
I do agree. I think this one has a lot more stakes to it than anything on the UFC Vegas card, considering the fact that Bivol is coming off his big win against Canelo Alvarez and Zurdo Ramirez is undefeated. So you've got
And isn't Ramirez still relatively young too?
Yes, and Dmitry Bivol, I want to check how many losses does he have on him.
Very few.
Actually, he has 0. So it's 0 versus no loss versus no loss. Somebody's always got to go. Yeah, Zan, I think this is the fight of the weekend right here.
Yeah, and my apologies for anybody who originally thought that Bivol actually has a loss. He does not. Neither does Ramirez. Neither does Ramirez as well. Yes, this is the fight of the weekend. And as for a prediction, I like Bivol to finish Ramirez before round 8. What do you think?
It's you know what, Zan? I'm gonna go against the green. Hashtag and new late finish for Zurdo.
Okay. Hey, and do you think if Zurdo does win the fight that there is an immediate rematch at play here?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's going to be a good enough fight that I think we're going to get an immediate rematch if Zurdo wins.
And now the final question regarding this fight is Bivol versus Ramirez worth the pay-per-view tag of admission, if you will?
What do you mean the pay-per-view tag of admission?
Well, I'm just saying, is it worth it? If you're on the fence about purchasing this fight, is it worth shelling out to watch Bivol, who just upset Canelo, fight Ramirez, who's also undefeated? That's what I meant.
I don't know. I don't know if it's worth the. I don't know if it's worth the pay-per-view price. Again, it's the biggest fight this weekend. They're both undefeated, but I don't know if either of those fighters have reached, pay-per-view territory.
Yeah. Actually, this fight is on DAZN.
It is on DAZN. That's why I was also a little confused. Like, wait, isn't the fight on DAZN like DAZN, not DAZN Plus?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but still, you do. What I meant by pay-per-view is you still need a DAZN subscription to watch the fight.
Oh,
so
yeah, Zan, I rarely used my DAZN subscription over the last couple of years, but I would be happy to use it on this fight.
Me too. I think I can count on one hand how many times per year I actually use it, and I think it's about 3 or 4. This is one of those ones where I will gladly use it as well. And if I in some other alternative universe had a ticket to this fight, I would be more than glad to go. Nonetheless, though, it should be a very interesting fight this weekend. It is for sure the biggest fight of the weekend, and hopefully we'll have a crazy story coming out of that fight. next week when we come back for episode 14. But before we get out of here, make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow both Tom and I on social media. All of that stuff is scrolling across the bottom as well. And if you can, before you get out of here too, be sure to ring the notification bell. That way you're notified of everything MD Dimension Network related. You can find my stuff at bjpen.com. You can find Tom's stuff at Fansided MMA. We always try to pump out content every single week because combat sports is one of those industries where there literally is no off season whatsoever. So for that, I'm Zain. He's Tom. Thank you very much again for tuning in, and we will see you back here next week. And we have a ton of stuff to cover, especially with the upcoming UFC pay-per-view event and a pretty darn good middleweight title fight to top the bill as well. We'll get into all of that and more as it is officially November, and it is officially one day closer to the end of what is the proverbial MMA calendar or combat sports calendar, if you will, that sometimes feels like it's never ending, but it will have an ending before we know.
For sure. So I'm Tom. That's Sam. We'll see you next week for all the big UFC 281 talk, from Adesanya versus Pereira to Esparza versus Weili Zhang to Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler and Frankie Edgar's retirement fight, and so much more. I can't wait for next week. But until then, always remember, be Joe Piper.
There you go. Have a good one. Thank you guys for listening.
Take care, guys.